At exactly 2:47 p.m. local time, under a pale Eastern European sky that gave no hint of the violence unfolding beneath it, a Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jet crossed the invisible line into Russian-controlled airspace, 90 seconds deep and counting, flying so low that its shadow raced along treetops and farm roads below, carrying beneath its wings two French-made ASM precision-guided bombs, whose presence alone represented a quiet technological rebellion against decades of Soviet-era limitations. Because this jet was never designed to carry them, never meant to fight this way. And yet here it was, moving at nearly 650 kilometers per hour, hugging the Earth to remain invisible to radar, aiming for a Russian border guard post Moscow believed was untouchable. A hardened node that quietly fed ammunition, fuel, and manpower into frontline units still pressing Ukrainian defenses. A place ground troops cursed daily as shells and rockets flowed through it unimpeded. And for the pilot in the cockpit, the mission timeline was brutally simple. 12 minutes of fuel margin, one attack window, one escape path, no backup. Because if anything went wrong, there would be no second attempt, no heroic rescue. Only wreckage hidden among forests and fields, and 6 seconds later, everything went wrong. At a combined closing speed of nearly 180 meters per second, a crow struck the left engine intake. A meaningless instant of bad luck with catastrophic consequences, as compressor blades spinning at more than 13,000 revolutions per minute disintegrated on impact, metal shards tearing through the engine core, triggering a violent compressor stall that announced itself with a grinding shriek no pilot ever wants to hear. The MiG yawing sharply left as thrust collapsed, altitude bleeding away toward the forest floor rushing up beneath him, alarms screaming while the pilot's world narrowed to instinct and training, his right foot slamming hard on the rudder to counter asymmetric thrust, left hand hauling back on the stick to arrest the descent, right hand punching the engine restart sequence without even looking, because there was no time to look, only seconds before impact. Trees flashing past close enough that individual branches blurred into green streaks, while inside the cockpit the situation deteriorated further as Russian electronic warfare systems jammed his GPS, wiping out digital navigation entirely, forcing him to rely on a folded paper map taped to his knee like something out of a Cold War training manual, fuel gauges ticking downward at an unforgiving rate, because a restarting engine drinks fuel like a drowning man gasps for air, and the restart cycle would take 30 seconds he simply did not have. At that same moment, kilometers away, a podlet, K1 low-altitude radar near Klyovo had been detecting something strange, faint intermittent contacts appearing over ridgelines and vanishing into valleys, signatures too small and too fleeting to inspire confidence. The operator leaning forward in his chair, fingers hovering near the radio, debating whether to report what was probably nothing more than birds or atmospheric clutter, just as the contact flickered one final time and vanished behind a hill, the lock lasting 6 seconds, 2 seconds short of a fire control solution, and in a decision that would never be logged in any report. The operator chose coffee over paperwork, leaving his console unattended as the MiG fell below radar once again. Back in the cockpit, the left engine finally coughed back to life at just 140 meters above ground, the pilot feeling the aircraft stabilize as thrust returned, but the relief was short-lived, because the engine was damaged, compressor efficiency degraded to barely 30%, vibrations rattling through the airframe, and worse still, the near crash had cost him precious time and fuel, the cold math rewriting itself instantly, 12 minutes of reserve reduced to 3, leaving no room for caution, no margin for error, only forward momentum, and as he pressed on, the next threat appeared without warning. High-voltage transmission lines stretching across the valley, absent from his tactical maps, materializing in his windscreen like a suspended wall 60 meters above the ground, leaving him 2 seconds to react at speed, instinct taking over as he pulled 5GS instantly, muscles straining, vision dimming, the MiG clawing upward just enough to clear the top wire by less than 10 meters, electromagnetic interference from the cables sending his instruments into momentary chaos, before the jet leveled out once more, battered but airborne. Behind him, the podlet, K1 operator was already halfway to the break room, unaware that history had slipped past his console, while ahead, The navigation checkpoint appeared exactly where the paper map promised it would, a distinctive bend in the river marking 10 kilometers to the weapon's release point. And now the pilot faced the decision every attack planner dreads, but sometimes accepts as necessary. A vertical climb through hostile airspace, exposing himself to every radar and missile system. In range, because low-level flight could not deliver the weapons accurately, and without accuracy, the mission was meaningless. Throttles advancing as he began the climb, G-forces slamming into him like a physical weight, 6 times Earth's gravity crushing him into the seat, his G-suit inflating hard around his legs and abdomen to keep blood in his brain. But even that was barely enough. Vision tunneling at 5,000 meters, darkness creeping in at the edges, consciousness flickering as the MiG pitched almost vertically upward, engine screaming at maximum thrust, the damaged left engine vibrating so violently it threatened to tear itself apart. But reducing power was not an option, because altitude was life. As he climbed, the cockpit filled with warnings, radar receivers lighting up with new threats every second, surface-to-air radars, airborne interceptors, fire control systems locking on as his jet announced itself to the sky. And then, at the worst possible moment, the weapon's interface failed, the jury-rig connection between French ASM bombs and Soviet-era avionics collapsing under stress. The panel flashing error messages in French, a cruel reminder of how improvised this capability really was. The bombs refusing to acknowledge release commands. The pilot's oxygen-starved mind struggling through emergency procedures as his right hand flipped switches, bypass systems, cycled power, nothing responding. While 72 kilometers away a Russian Su-35 pilot saw the anomaly appear on radar and reacted instantly, locking the climbing MiG and firing an R-37M hypersonic missile without hesitation, a weapon designed to kill targets long before they ever knew it was coming. Accelerating to Mach 6 and devouring distance at 2 kilometers per second. The Ukrainian pilot's radar warning receiver screamed the moment the missile left its rail, identifying the threat, the bearing, the closing speed, but he could not evade yet. Not while the bombs were still attached. Not while the mission remained unfinished. Left hand steady on the stick, right hand diving for the emergency manual release switches, individual pickle buttons bypassing the failed digital interface. Altitude ticking upward past 8,000 meters as he reached the release point. Heart pounding, muscles screaming, smashing the first button and feeling nothing, holding it down, counting seconds that felt like minutes, until finally the bomb dropped free and its rocket motor ignited after a terrifying delay. The second bomb following moments later, systems finally responding. And only then could he evade, rolling inverted and pulling into a brutal split S-9GS tearing at his body. Vision going completely black as he traded altitude for speed, the missile still tracking. Chaff dispensers firing and jamming. ECM pods shutting down from thermal overload, leaving him with one final option, the notch maneuver, turning perpendicular to the missile's flight path, freezing relative motion just long enough to confuse its seeker. The R-37M streaking past barely 100 meters behind him, proximity fuse failing to trigger. Fragments from its self-destruct punching holes in the MiG's tail. Damage he did not even register as he dove back toward the earth, desperate to hide once more among hills and valleys. High above, the 2 ASM bombs climbed toward their apex, their rocket motors burning out as they began a long, silent fall toward the border guard post, now alone, navigating through layers of electronic warfare, satellite denial, and atmospheric chaos. One bomb already compromised by contaminated fuel that reduced thrust and shortened burn time. Onboard computers recalculating trajectories in real time as GPS signals vanished under Russian jamming, forcing a switch to inertial navigation. Gyroscopes accumulating errors second by second, while infrared seekers struggled against sun glare, wind shear spun control surfaces, and Russian air defense systems scrambled to respond, launching missiles that could not intercept ballistic freefall, guns elevating just short of the necessary angle, physics defeating doctrine, until at last, seconds before impact, both bombs found their targets through heat, contrast, and shape recognition, diving almost vertically into the compound, the first, punching through the roof and detonating sideways, collapsing the structure like a felled tree, the second striking armored vehicles just meters off center, but unleashing a fuel-air inferno hot enough to melt steel and flesh alike. While far to the west, a battered MiG-29 limped back into Ukrainian airspace on one damaged engine, fuel tanks nearly dry, pilot half-conscious, hands shaking, mission ugly, chaotic, barely successful, but successful nonetheless, because in real war, perfection does not matter. Survival does not always matter, only whether the target is destroyed and the balance shifts, even slightly. And on that day, for 12 brutal minutes, one pilot, one jet, and two imperfect bombs prove that nothing in this war is truly untouchable.